Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good evening.
Hello, Ken.
I am so glad you guys can't see me playing my air violin when we're doing. All right. Welcome, everyone. This is episode 209 of Line Upon Line. And tonight we're going to talk about a topic that Tom suggested, which was, why does God hate hypocrisy? I think it's going to be an excellent topic. And we're going to start it out again with Dr. Ricks, of course. By the way, we have Kelly with us and we have Gary with us tonight. So again, if you have a few jokes, and I know you do, go ahead and start us out.
Okay. These are muses of an old man, because we're all young here, right? Muses of an old man. He says, sometimes I sit quietly and wonder why I'm not in a mental asylum. Then I look around, I watch TV and realize maybe I already am. I'm not lazy. I just really enjoy doing nothing. Here's one of my favorite musings of an old man. So when is this "you're old enough to know better" supposed to kick in? They say when you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It's only difficult for others. It's the same way when you're stupid. And here's one of my old times favorite musings of an old man. I prefer not to think before I speak. I like being just as surprised as everybody else with what comes out of my mouth.
I know people like that.
Yes. Here's a real great groaner for you. Why was the broom late for work? It overswept. Here's one that I like. I find it ironic that the colors red, white, and blue represent freedom, except when they're flashing behind you on the highway. Okay. Now, having lived in Evanston, Illinois during the winter, this joke has meaning. So just think about yourself in the winter that's coming up in some nice place like Evanston, Illinois. Frozen. Joe and Sue were listening to the Minneapolis weather report at breakfast. The announcer said, there'll be 3 to 5 inches of snow today. Therefore, move your cars and park them on the odd side of the street. 2 days later, he said there'll be 4 to 6 inches of snow. Move your cars and park them to the even numbered side of the street. 3 days later, they've got over 1 foot and 2 inches of snow. It was a terrible blizzard. And the weatherman was saying, here's what everybody should do. They must, boom, the power went out. And Joe, you don't know what to do now. The power's out. I'm going to get to hear the guy on the radio. What are we supposed to do now? And his wife said, oh, Joe, just leave the car in the garage.
There's some tough winters up there in Illinois.
Yeah, they got some tough winters up there. I do remember having to do that, move my car back and forth. Maybe I could stick in one more stupid joke.
All right.
One more joke. I can see they're resisting me. Look. The guy said, I went by my house, the one I grew up in, and I asked if I could go in and look around. for old time's sake. They said no and slammed the door. My parents can be so rude.
Okay, you're on a roll. You sure you don't have one more?
You want to tell that joke, Gary, that you mentioned to us?
Well, did you hear about the poor man that was so ugly? When he went to join the ugly club, they said, sorry, no professionals. I don't know if we could get in that club or not.
No comment. One time I was young and handsome, but we'll talk about that later. At least that's what certain girls told me. So what can I say? Just kidding. Just kidding. Okay. I'm going to try to do this. I believe we can do it. Hypocrisy is such a deep subject. I decided we'd stick in 2 weeks of it, back to back. This is hypocrisy number 1, kind of a big part of it. Then we're going to end it next weekend with, there's a little overlap, and we'll focus more on how we can avoid being hypocrites. I mean, they're overlapping, obviously, but I believe there's enough material for 2 programs, and we'll try to discuss the internet a little bit at the backside of each program. At least I've got an article and some thoughts. I don't know what to make of it, but the internet's so important to our world, I think we should mention it. Okay, the first thing I want to mention, I really believe that one of the biggest things that God is achieving, he wants sons who will be different than Satan and the demons that he pulled away, the fallen demons. Well, one of Satan's biggest characteristics is hypocrisy. Realize the devil wants to be worshipped as a god, but he is evil incarnate. Let's put up the first slide. Not only is he evil incarnate, but his goal is to undermine mankind and get us to self-destruct. That's pretty evil.
Second Corinthians 11:14, and no marvel, for even Satan fashioneth himself into an angel of light. It is no great thing, therefore, if his ministers also fashion themselves as ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works.
Yeah, and it's hard to think of the devil wants to be known as an angel of light, but I really think he does want to be worshipped at the same time he's evil. It's like he's both ends of that horrible mixture. It reminds me of leaders like Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and to a lesser degree, Castro. I'm sure most people know by now, Stalin killed more of his own people than Hitler, roughly 20 million. At the same time, Stalin used the propaganda machinery of the Soviet Empire to make him, they call it deification, that's the propaganda technique, to make Stalin into a god. Mao did the same thing, Hitler did the same thing, same with Castro. These men were unspeakably evil, but they were so hypocritical they wanted to be worshipped as gods. It's almost, the hypocrisy is almost unbelievable, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you can see PR posters of Hitler, in German, with the eagle like a dove behind him and light behind him, like he's a great messianic light bringer. Now, this is the guy that is blackmailing his enemies in his brown shirts, beating up people. And when he got the chance, he was killing Jews and his political enemies in Germany. This guy is as evil as you can get. But his propaganda pushed him as someone to be worshipped, like Caesar. Hard to believe, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And what may be worse is there may be one more dictator yet to come who will do something similar.
It's almost like they're acting the role of a little Satan.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be worshipped for spreading evil.
And what's scary is, to some extent, it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what's surprising is when you have that much evil and yet people are accepting of it and willing to worship it, even though it's that evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, at first they're brainwashed. They're sold the bill of goods that this is going to be the future. This is going to be what makes your life better. Then after a short period of time, you're the only reason you're supporting it is because you're looking at down the barrel of a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's where it ends up.
What's amazing is after they've been taught to worship someone like Stalin, and then all of a sudden one day they see people who disagree, or sometimes it's just they have too much land and the government wants to take it and they don't like it. They throw them in a boxcar to frozen Siberia, and you pretty much know what's going to happen to most of those people. And yet you still worship Stalin. I thought, wow. Think about that.
Yeah. And I also find it interesting that these people, they demand loyalty from the people that are around them. But they end up destroying those who are loyal to them because they become so paranoid that they're not. And they destroy those who actually would support them because of their own paranoia, because of that evil that what they're looking for. They're demanding loyalty, but they will show no loyalty whatsoever to anybody.
One of the most horrible statements that Stalin made, I forget the guy's name. I think it's Chernenko, but whatever his name, he actually told Stalin about people who were working against getting him out of power and worked with him from the very beginning, helped him rise to power, one of his top lieutenants. Well, 20 years later, he had the guy purged, sent to Siberia to die. And the guy said, but what about loyalty? I was loyal to you. And Stalin says, that loyalty is for dogs.
Yeah.
Can you believe that?
Yeah.
It's almost like he got rid of all his top lieutenants, and there's nobody who could ever question anything he said. I mean, it looks that bad. And anyway, that's how hypocritical some people have been in the 20th century. By the way, the meaning of the word hypocrite comes from the Greek theater. In those days, those amphitheaters, some which still exist today, they wore a mask and they played different roles. Well, the Greek word hypocrite comes from the Greek word actor. It means to wear a mask. So since the New Testament's written in Greek, it's someone who is masking his true self from other people. That's a hypocrite. Let's put up slide number 2.
All right, Matthew 7:3. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye.
Before we read the next set of verses, when Christ made that statement, we believe a lot of what he said was directed toward the leaders of the nation. While they were judging other people, they were worse. And it's kind of, I almost think that's one of the things, I know everybody believes in God's standards of right and wrong, but we have to be careful. You know what I mean? But you're telling other people they're wrong, imply that you're above all that.
Yeah. I think that's one thing, you've got to be careful about that, that you understand yourself and understand where you are, because we're all sinners. And so, to understand that before you start looking at somebody else and pointing out their sin and how they're doing things and what they're doing, you're better off to look at yourself and deal with your own issues than you ought to start pointing your finger at somebody else. And it's so nice and easy to be able to do that. I mean, that human nature is you want to find somebody else and go, oh, but they're so much worse than I am because they did this. you know, or this person is a liar, so they're much worse than I am. I cheated on my taxes. That's not as bad as lying. So they're so much worse. And people seem to forget that to God, it's all the same. It really doesn't matter what sin you've committed. You're all a sinner, so it's all the same. And so just, you know, quit worrying about other people and worry about yourself.
Yeah, they want to skate by on the degrees of sinness. I guess this is how bad is it, and they get to make their own degrees up. They get to be the ones who know where the chart is or where the meter is.
Yes.
I would never do that.
Yeah.
Let's go see the rest of that slide. But I tell you, it's amazing way to look at it. All
right. Matthew 23:3. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do. But do not do according to their works. For they say do and not do. For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do is to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments.
You know, there are some government leaders and agents. They pass laws, but then they make exemptions for themselves. And I think the Pharisees must have done some of that too. You see how nice that would be? You regular folks have to do that, but we're so high and mighty, we accept ourselves from that.
Like the affordable health care. You know, they don't have to deal with that, but all the rest of us do.
The government pays their stuff for them. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and if you made them pay it, they'd be screaming mad.
Yeah, I mean, I always want, you know, things my way, and you know, you have to do it this way because I'm not you. So you know, you do it that way. It's how you need to do it because I'm doing it this way.
I'm also told this. I'm not a lawyer, but anything you say in the Senate that could affect some industry, you're not subject to insider trading laws like everybody else. You may wonder why we have so many wealthy senators. These they exempt themselves from that law. That's what I'm told. How you like that?
They exempt themselves from most of the laws, don't they?
Yes, they do. We've seen that in the last year or two for sure. Hey, by the way, anybody wanting to know, there's a word in there, phylacteries. If someone was be interested, there's a box they would make up or a little container to put they would like write the 10 Commandments or laws of God on it and put that on there. They'd wear it. So the bigger one they had, the more righteous they were, you know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I thought you said factory.
You know? No. Got to be careful how we say that. But yeah.
There's people today that they wear tassels on the edge of their clothing, and a friend of mine, you know, we knew some people who did that, and we were talking one day, and it both struck us, and because we both said the same thing. Did you notice that they're getting longer each week?
What?
And they're making their tassels bigger because nobody had asked them about them. Everybody, you know, you noticed them, and you were like, okay, yeah, I really don't want to get involved in that. So they started making them bigger, trying to get attention. So you would ask them why they're wearing those.
I'm going to be careful when I say that. There are exceptions to anything we say, of course. But they say if somebody is asked to give prayers in church and he always gives long prayers, it's going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm. And
it could be a sign of self-righteousness.
Yeah. And a lot of times those same people will make comments about other people saying that, can you believe how long they are? Can you believe how long prayer you went?
Yeah.
Again, that's part of that. We don't, a lot of times we don't see our own faults, but we see someone else with the same fault we have, and we're quick to point it out and not see our own.
Right. That hence the plank in your own eye.
Yes.
And like you were saying, Kelly, that expression, seen of men. Mm-hmm. And God says, be careful, we're not doing all these things to be seen of men instead of a more pure worship of God. And that's
why we're told to go to in a room and pray, not to do it in public, and throw a carpet down and in the middle of a restaurant or whatever. And we're told to do it in private.
Yeah.
Go to your closet.
I mean, if somebody wants to pray in a restaurant, that's their business. But you shouldn't do it to impress other people with how pious you are, because God pretty much says the exact opposite of that. So, I mean, don't do it to impress other people. I guess that's what the Bible would say. Actually, in today's world, it might not impress other people.
Well, that's the thing. Some people, I mean, they do it just hoping that somebody will be upset, because then they feel more righteous, because here I'm a martyr now. I was saying my prayers in the restaurant, and the people next to us got upset because we were saying them out loud, and they said something, and so now I'm more righteous because they picked on me.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah. Try to be quiet about it.
I think
unobtrusive, is that the right word?
No.
I think when I go on Facebook and I see all these people that love to either make a religious quote or a scriptural quote or something, and then they all want to holler amen and put it down there, and it just kind of annoys me, because it's doing that same thing. It's throwing it out to the public. It's throwing it out to the Facebook audience. Look how religious I am.
Yes. And that's, I've seen people that, they'll post something religious and they'll turn around and post something that is entirely inappropriate.
Yeah.
And you're like, do you not see what you're doing here? I mean, you're saying one thing with your mouth and then trying to say something else that's good, and it doesn't work. You can't do that, but people will, and they don't seem to see an issue with it.
They don't see an issue with it. I've argued with some people about it, but they're not going to see it.
Now, if somebody believes that they need to pray before they eat, no matter where they are, that's fine. But remember, God doesn't want you to do it to impress other people.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's not what I was talking about specifically. I was talking about.
You mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, because I think people want to impress other people.
They do.
Yeah.
There's a way to do it appropriately in a restaurant. You just have to be humble about it and not broadcast it.
Yeah.
I've seen some people do it out of the corner of my eye, and I respected them for it.
Right. And that is good, but you also have to be careful when you're doing something like that, because you're actually setting yourself up to be a hypocrite.
Mm-hmm.
Because you do that where people can see it, and then the waiter or the waitress comes over, or your food's not right, and you get loud with him, you start screaming at them, you start calling them idiots, and then people are like, yeah, you're a real Christian.
Yeah.
None of us would do that, right? Nobody, none of the people.
Just like having a fish on the back of your car and cutting people off and flipping them off. And no,
you got the waitress crying.
Yeah.
Oh, one of the best examples of a hypocrite I ever saw. I was coming back from Dayton, and I was cruising up through Lima, and there was this woman with this big bumper sticker on the rear fender. It wasn't on the bus. It was on the rear fender on the driver's side. It said, "Stay alive, don't text and drive." And I see that as I'm pulling up, and I pull right up next to her. And when I pull up next to her, here she is. She's looking down. She's looking down in her lap, and she's, and I'm driving by, and I'm just rolling. I'm waving and I'm laughing, and she looked at me and she went.
There's somebody told a joke. I don't know. Dr. Rich may have even told this joke, but there's the joke about the police officer pulls the car over and has the person get out and all frisk them down. It's like, what's going on? Because, oh, well, I figured you must have stole the car because of all the religious stickers you have on here and the way you've been driving and
yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, the way you've been driving. Yeah, that's true. I've heard people say, if you are a small businessman, you serve the poor, you put in your card that you're a Christian businessman, and then you jack them up for every penny you can get. It looks bad.
Yeah. Well, it does. I mean, and I'll be honest, when I see somebody who puts that out there like that, I tend to stay away from them, because my experience has been most time, if you're having to advertise that you're a Christian, that means I'm not going to recognize that you're a Christian. So I don't know that I want to do business with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things that the New Testament points out is God is primarily concerned with our heart. He's changing our heart, and that's the core of the new covenant. And hypocrisy is like a poison for the heart. Let's put up the next slides. We look at some of the basics of Christianity, which are mentioned in this next slide.
All right, Hebrews 6, verse 1. Therefore, leaving the discussion of the elementary principles of Christ, let us go on to perfection, not laying again the foundation of repentance from dead works and of faith toward God, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they did not continue in my covenant, and I disregarded them, says the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, says the Lord, I will put my laws in their mind and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people.
And I just think when you're wearing a mask, deceiving other people, it's got to affect your heart deep down, even if you don't see it. And that may be, because the question is, because you can ask this question, why was Christ and his nation harder than the religious leaders, harder on the religious leaders than he was the tax collectors who are hated, well, in some cases, hookers, and other sinners? He seemed to be more upset with the religious leaders and their hypocrisy than the ones who knew they were sinners, because I think he felt they were perverting their heart.
Mm-hmm. And they were supposed to represent God. Yeah. They were supposed to be leading people by example.
I mean, the quickest way to turn somebody off of God is to put yourself out there as representing someone who believes in God and being a hypocrite. Again, that's things I've heard people say, that they won't go to church because churches are full of hypocrites. And, sometimes it's hard to argue with them, because a lot of times you see that kind of activity going on in churches where people aren't acting the way they're supposed to act. And that's what they say. This is how you're supposed to act. And then they don't act that way. And so people see hypocrites and are like, well, why would I want to go there? Because you don't even do what you say you believe.
My example is I always go back to the same story when I was working at a part-time party store. And one of the big churches in the community there decided they were going to have Las Vegas night, which they did from time to time. And they came to the party store I worked at and ordered all their liquor, kegs of beer, cartons of cigarettes, and I delivered it. And then the bottom of that huge church, they had it all set up like a casino. Ashtrays on the table, the bar was open. They were standing in the parking lot cussing. Talk about hypocrites.
Yeah.
Well, I don't really know if this, maybe I shouldn't mention it. Another church had bingo night, and I won't go into the details. The smoke was so thick, the bingo night, you really had to come out of there. It made you sick.
Did you have to crawl on the floor to get out?
It's almost that bad. I had to come out every so often to get fresh air. It's a long story why we got volunteered into having to work just once. I'll go into that later, but because as a school related to a private school, but it was religious. It was for a big church around here. I won't mention the church. I won't embarrass them, but boy, the smoke was horrible.
Oh, you can't smoke in school, but you can smoke in church.
But it made a lot of money for them, so I understand why they did it for the money. But oh well, it didn't make them look good. That's all I can say. But I guess a lot of people say, "Oh, we got bigger problems than that," and they probably do have bigger problems than that. I would like to add one more thing. One way you might look at church is like a hospital, but you have to explain it to people. Like Christ said to the Pharisees, because they said, well, why are you dealing with these people that we know are sinners? And Christ said, well, who needs a doctor? Those that are healthy or those that are sick? And obviously, the answer was, you all are so spiritually healthy, you don't need me, but they do. Another way to look at the church is like a hospital. There are going to be a lot of sick people in the church who haven't yet overcome their many sins and weaknesses, and they're hopefully going to work on them. But I think it's almost an attitude that we could convey that, yes, we're not perfect. Don't judge me yet. I'm not a finished product yet. But I'll say this accurately. We, all of us, have to struggle with our human nature like everybody else. So you're not going to see perfection among us. I think if we can convey that attitude, then we won't seem so hypocritical when a problem does arise.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a matter of understanding that people are struggling. I'm struggling, and if I'm struggling, then I can't hold them to a higher standard. But we can have expectations. This is where we're all trying to get to. This is what we're trying to achieve. And as I'm trying to achieve it, I need to look at the person who is struggling also, and rather than, putting a foot in their face and push them down the hill, grab a hold of their arm and help them up so that we both can achieve what we're trying to achieve together. And I think it's that attitude of understanding that we're all trying to get to the same place and we all need each other's help. And it's not about, pushing someone else down to, lift myself up. It's about getting both of us to that same goal.
Instead of pretending that, well, I'm so righteous and you're not, therefore we're kind of judging you or condemning you.
Right.
Let's go to the next slide. It has to do with Judas, but there's kind of a point here. Anyway, go ahead.
Luke 18:9. Also he spake this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Two men went to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. And the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted.
Notice that expression that I'm not as other men. You think anytime we start thinking that you don't have the same human nature as other people do, you're well on the way to becoming a big-time hypocrite, like the Pharisees.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
And human nature can be tricky, admittedly, but everybody's got to deal with it. And some of those guys from other verses, they actually counted the tea leaves in their garden to prove how righteous they were for tithing. And yet they left important things like justice and kindness and mercy completely out of the picture. That's amazing. Let's go to the next slide as we take a look at all these things.
Matthew 6:1. Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites.
By the way, we actually think, and I'll stop for interrupting you, sorry. We actually think some of the more wealthy Pharisees had a servant with a trumpet and a little family emblem or something on it. You put in more coins, bing, 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 bing. People could hear that too. But he wanted more than just the extra bing, 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 bing. So more coins in the coffer. The guy would blow a trumpet, and everybody would turn. Oh, there's that pious
They had their own
I guess
theme band. They brought their own theme.
pious.
So like Darth Vader walks in the room and you're dun dun dun. They got a trumpet.
Yeah,
And they
it's
each
like
have their
Darth
own
Vader.
tune. They each have their own special tune, you know.
The trumpet players were righteous Pharisee James.
Wow.
And look
That's
at how
good.
many coins he's throwing at. Bing, bing, bing. You know, there must be at least 20 coins, silver coins going in the coffer instead of 2 little pennies you can hardly hear from the widow. But I mean, you think about the amount of vanity it would take to do that, but apparently they did it.
Not surprised.
Mhm.
All right. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogue and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly.
Do any of you remember the Andy Griffin show? Griffith.
Yeah.
If I remember, he was so, at least this is the way they wrote the script, of course. He was so nice that sometimes he would do something good and give the credit to Barney or whoever. He wouldn't take it himself. I mean, I realized that was just a corny TV show, but it did show a Christian principle, which you rarely see on TV anymore.
Yeah, true.
I'm not the only
I
one.
think
who
unless
remembers
you're
that, right?
watching a 30-year-old sitcom or something, you're not going to see it on TV.
No.
No, the kind of stuff you're going to see on TV is not stuff that you're going to see that's good.
Oh, wait a minute. I went 30 years back. That wasn't far enough. Let's go back 50.
Yeah.
One time, Danny Thomas was coming through Mayberry, and Andy gave him a ticket, but it was for a good reason.
Yeah, and a lot of TV shows then, weren't perfect. They had reasonable moral messages in there, like Little House on the Prairie and some others, and you just don't see that kind of thing. Now you see, well, we watched one because it's a new program. We want to see what it's like. We could only have about 15 minutes. The whole thing was how silly it is to believe in God. That was the theme. Now, maybe it ended a little more positive, but we couldn't take the rest of it. We just deleted the program. But that's what goes on in television now. That's right. That's what's going on in TV nowadays. And they did a good job of making religion look bad, too.
Well, some of the mainstream religion makes it real easy to do that. Some of the things they do make it real easy.
Yeah. Again, that's because people see hypocrisy.
Well, some of it starts in the mainstream religions. Every few years at election time, all these big churches in Detroit invite all the nominees to come to their churches and talk politics, and garner votes, and they're doing that from the podium.
The thing that bothered me about the Johnson Amendment, which, you lose your IRS status if you talk politics in church, which I don't think the IRS should have anything to do with what churches do or say. But on the far left, you could do it and nobody would complain or IRS wouldn't bother. But if a conservative in a conservative church said something, the IRS would threaten them so they'd have to back off. But it was definitely one-sided. Far left churches did all kinds of stuff, and the IRS could care less. And they came down on, they came down on the Tea Party in a terrible way. Mm-hmm. And I think even some Republicans in Congress didn't like the Tea Party. I guess some of them came to complain about the IRS, but basically the IRS got away with it.
Yeah, no one's investigating Lerner or whatever her name was.
Yeah, they got away with it. I mean, there's something wrong with that, but I guess that's the world we live in.
I mean, liberal politics really is hypocritical. I mean, they talk about being tolerant and caring and loving, and that's all fine and dandy as long as you agree with them. But if you don't agree with them or you take an opposite stand, they are the most intolerant and unloving group of people that there are. I mean, it's so hypocritical. that you agree with us, everything's fine, but if you don't, then you don't deserve to live. And that's
Yeah, I heard someone were taking one of our major politicians saying he was just like Hitler. One guy said whose parents had lived in Europe under Hitler, they have no idea what they're talking about.
No, not at all.
Or they say that Hitler is a conservative. Hitler was obviously he's a socialist because that's what National Socialists mean. But conservatives believe in small government. Hitler did not believe in small government.
no.
Hitler took the guns away from the German people. Conservatives believe in the Second Amendment. Conservatives believe in individual rights. Hitler did not believe in individual rights. You do what the party and the government told you, or else the Gulag, well, concentration camp, same principle. We could go on, and the government ran many big industries in the National Socialist Party in Germany. They were not free enterprise. I could go on and on, but the point is that a lot of people throw those epithets at people well, I'm not against any religion, but for instance, if you were to tell people that you think certain religions are incompatible with our Constitution, they wouldn't just say that you have a difference of a religious agreement. They would call you phobic.
Yes, exactly.
And that title takes away your ability to be, it's like semantic terror. You're phobic. That's terrible. Oh. You see how hypocritical that is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they used phobia to invalidate you. If they can't win an argument, they go right to you're a phobic or a racist or what have you. That way it invalidates your argument, even if you're right. It invalidates. You know, one interesting about, I hear the left like to throw Hitler's name around. Do you know there was communications in the Nazi party? You know where they got the idea of how to eliminate the Jews and a lot of Christians and people that were sick or, you know, invalid. They claim in Nazi communications or in statements they made that they got the idea from the United States and how they dealt with the American Indians. What party did that? What party did that?
By the way, euthanasia, that concept came out of the liberals in America in the 1910s, and I don't know exactly all the details, but Sanger was one of the big ones. Abortion was to get rid of the populations that were not quite smart enough, advanced enough, as they saw it. But abortion, euthanasia, same thing with handicap. Now, they weren't able to pull that off in America, but the concept was talked about and promoted. Well, they did get abortion going, and it's still going, actually, this very day. Most of the abortion clinics are in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods and in poor parts of town. Most people don't know that.
All the while they claim to be caring about minorities, Blacks and Hispanics. They're putting these facilities near them to kill as many off as they can. So who's a hypocrite there?
Mm-hmm.
Just saying.
Yeah, but no one seems to know it because I guess the media won't tell them, and they just don't know. A lot of these ideas come from the far left, and what can I say? Hitler took some of that craziness and actually did it.
Yeah, and there's like we know there's plenty of hypocrisy to go around, no matter what political affiliation or creed or what have you. But you know, we didn't put it in here, but another verse in the Bible or another area that hits me with hypocrisy is when, remember, I think it was in John when Christ was writing names, what people had done in the ground with the I don't know, the hooker or whatever you would call her, the woman who was caught, and all of a sudden all these guys are looking down, reading what he wrote, because they're wanting to kill her for this, and they were participants in it. That was a big time example of hypocrisy. You know, he said, "Where's all your accusers now?" They flew the coop. They don't want no part of that. People don't like to have their hypocrisy pointed out to them. They get kind of upset when you do that.
Oh yeah, you don't want to do that.
They take offense to that for some reason.
They'll deny it and try to figure out some way that you're the one that's the hypocrite.
And attack you.
Exactly. And you very well may be for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I guess it's human nature, because I've caught myself with a hypocritical thought, and maybe I've even said something that was hypocritical. Thankfully, I can stop and be remorseful when I realize what I've done. But I think it's just, you know, Satan is the god of this world. And
you know, you're right. And being in a church would make, it seems to make you recognize it much quicker, sometimes before it escapes, where when before you was in a church, you wouldn't even have seen it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, being in the church, that's part of it. We're supposed to be growing spiritually so that we do see these things sooner and can react quicker and try to curtail them quicker than we did when we first came in the church. And again, that's part of that growing process.
Absolutely.
Let's go look at our next slide or two.
All right. James 1:26. If anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world.
And I think our mouth or lips is one of the quickest ways to act a hypocrite.
It is.
And I do think we'll look at this probably a little bit more in part 2. But since, like you were saying, Kelly and Gary, human nature is such that we do have to watch it. It's going to be a problem. The last little section I want to talk about is false friends are a form of hypocrisy. Because I was thinking about Judas, and there are more scriptures we could have put in there about Judas, but I just wanted to. This first scripture is a prophecy about Judah. I mean, about Judas.
All right. Psalms 55:21. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. They speak idly, everyone with his neighbor. With flattering lips and a double heart they speak. May the Lord cut off all flattering lips and the tongue that speaks proud things. Who have said, with our tongue we will prevail. Our lips are our own. Who is Lord over us?
And there are people with their words and their flattery, they do try to set you up for destruction. Some people are good at it. I mean, I'm assuming this prophecy was a prediction about Judas. But there are a lot of people like that who flatter you. And you know, one of the things about Judas, the so-called kiss of death, you realize that he could have just walked up to Christ, because Christ was hard for them to catch and keep a hold of. He could have just grabbed him or got right up in his face and pointed at him and said to the mob, "There he is, go get him." But he hugged him like they do in the Middle East and kissed him on the cheek. Why the kiss of death? Because he was still pretending. And maybe this is where it's tricky. I do think Judas was deceived by the devil. I'll give the devil some credit. Judas had kind of a love-hate relationship because of his stealing, and Christ probably admonished him about it, in some kind of way that he could sense. I think he had a love-hate relationship with Christ. But while he was leading a mob to grab Christ, he still kissed him. That's the level of hypocrisy he had. And even when they were all together for the Passover, and Christ said, "One of you is going to betray me," and apparently all 12 said, "Is it I?" Judas said it too, as if to appear before the others that he was innocent, when he knew he was getting ready to do it. That's an example of hypocrisy. And some people, I think, are good at betraying other people.
Yes, it happens. Happens often in the workplace where someone seems to befriend a supervisor or somebody who's above them, and becomes their earns their trust and is always there to support them in their face to their face. But then when their back's turned, they're doing everything they can to undermine them so they'll fail. And then when it gets to the point where they're about to fail, that person turns to that person for support. They pull their legs out from under them because they're wanting the promotion over them and are hoping to get them out of the way so they can be the ones that promoted.
There's one in every work. There's one in every shop, every workplace, everywhere. And even if it's not for that, it's just out of pure spite they'll do it.
Also, go ahead.
I was saying, and the same thing, it actually happens in church too. I mean, you have people who come in every week and they set up the room, they put out the hymnals, and most people don't even know who it is that does it. They just show up there and it's done. And then you'll have people who they won't help or do anything until someone that they consider to be of importance walks in the room, and then all of a sudden they're like standing there like, oh, like they're putting out the hymnals and things, but they've never put one out at all. They're just holding them. And then the moment that person leaves, they lay the books down and leave too. And they haven't done anything, but they were the ones that were doing it.
Yeah, I mean, buddy.
It does. And it's, goes back to also the only reason they were doing it was to impress the person that they believe has some kind of authority or title or whatever, and puts importance in that. And they don't understand that serving has nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah. And I think someone once said that if you have a secret mistake that you've made, maybe like on your job or in church, and someone's trying to ooze up to you to get you to confide, it's probably not wise to confide. You think you can trust them, but maybe 4 or 5 years in the future, they'll use it against you. It has happened. Well, it's happened a number of times. I'll put it that way. You think you can trust people? Maybe, but if the opportunity comes up where it'll be really useful for them to spill all of your guts on Facebook or whatever, or to your boss, you never know.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of one of the things. Facebook makes it so much easier to be a hypocrite, and people don't even realize they're doing it, because now they're just throwing it out there on Facebook, and they don't even realize that what they're doing, they're posting it, they're not saying it, and so somehow they separate that's not being hypocritical. Posting on Facebook, it's just social media. That doesn't count, but yet it's the same thing.
Let's look at the last slide, because I believe it was a problem for the Apostle Paul. One of his great perils involves hypocritical false friends.
Second Corinthians 11:26. In journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren.
Yeah, in perils among false brethren. He ranks that with robbers, with being lost at sea. I mean, he ranks it up there with a lot of the worst tragedies, being stabbed in the back by false brothers. It's a form of betrayal and hypocrisy. And I think the devil likes that. I think that's one of the devil's main characteristics is betrayal. And it's a big one. Also, we wanted to talk about the internet. I'm going to admit I'm not really a full expert on it, but I was told that in 2014, the Obama administration was giving America, you probably know that the theory of the internet, and the internet was created in America. And I actually even took a math science course. This is back when they had these computers were as big as a room, run by water, and you had to punch cards, use them, and they hooked certain college labs and Defense Department research labs together by telephone, and they said, this is called the internet for better research. We would never have guessed way back then that it would become what I guess it became in '94, the greatest shopping, whatever you want to call it, in the history of the world. But in 1914 and 1915, the domain naming system, which was controlled by a group in California and I guess American Commerce Department, had something to do with it, was given that control up to the United Nations. And it's a little more complicated. There's some lawsuits. And I have some quotes from some college professors saying, well, if it's truly international, why should America have too much control over the names and all that sort of thing? The other people have disagreed. But I like to think, I want to see what you all think of it, that if the United Nations and all these other agencies involved, it becomes, the ICANN becomes more international, because the internet's international. Let's say it should be international. When it was under American leadership up until just recently, the internet grew and blossomed with a great deal of freedom. Once the United Nations gets control of it, major players, United Nations, will start to affect the freedom of the internet, both names and a bunch of other stuff. So that's the theory. I wanted to see what you all think.
Well, I was reading something today, and when it was signed over to, or the United States pulled out their control of it, I read that part of that was that the United Nations could not take control of ICANN. That ICANN would remain an independent international body. I mean, they have a board now, and they have people who are serving on the board who are business people and computer experts and politicians and other things that are on the board. So the board has some control over what happens. But ICANN is basically a big database that was created because when the internet was founded, everybody, if you wanted to go to a website, you had to know what the number was, the IP address. And so they created this database to equalize the IP address with words. So all you had to do is remember the word and type the word in, you can go there. So, you know, relinquishing some control, the United States did have control somewhat over basically being able to say, no, we don't like that. No, you're not going to do that. Like with naming syntax, the way names were written out and stuff. So with an international body, you could see where, for instance, we decide to have a website called the Intercontinental Church of God, and we try to register that, and they come back and say, well, you know, we don't really think churches have a place on the internet, so therefore we're not going to register that name. So they could have some effect in that aspect, which there again could then keep God's word from getting out on one of the greatest things to spread God's word that's come along, the internet. And so, you know, if you have say over that, then it is possible they could start censoring certain things, and especially if the UN has any influence, because the UN is pretty much a liberal body, then anything to do with any kind of conservatism or anything that they could, you know, influence and say, well, we don't think we should have these names out there. We don't think this name should be allowed to be registered, and start putting restrictions on. So that's kind of what I see that could happen in the future if the UN gets their hands on it. But like I said, I was reading that part of that deal was to let them become independent, was that the UN could not control them directly. Now, indirectly,
it's the camel's nose under the tent.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And you know what? If you were last week, the Prime Minister, I think it was Prime Minister of England, said there was something came up there, you know, where they've had some violent things, and they're blaming things that were seen on YouTube. And his statement was something to the effect that YouTube, or these companies like YouTube and Facebook, instead of waiting for the police or authorities to tell them to take something down that is inappropriate or that is objectionable, and of course you can read a million things into that, like someone up at a podium someday that could be speaking the actual words of God. They said, well, these companies are going to have to start taking this stuff down. They're going to have to start being proactive. So it's akin to book burning. I mean, you don't, I mean, I don't like a lot of the stuff that's on the internet. A good portion of it, I don't agree with, and I wish it wasn't there. But once you go after that, then they can come after you.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that's, we are living in the golden age of freedom of speech and freedom of information and thought and being able to communicate back and forth. I think we're at the end of the golden age of that. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't start very soon. That, and we've seen it with that memo that was released at Google, and they call it, I mean, they're calling it a manifesto now. It was just a memo, and the guy lost his job because of what he said. So the thought police are coming.
Yeah.
And so that's where it'll lead to. Pretty soon they're going to start filtering. They'll start pulling things off. They'll start pulling things that they think, and who are they to decide, but they will be. It'll be a body like the UN will decide what's good and what's not good.
And that guy was right. That's what made it worse.
Yes, yes, he was absolutely right. And it wasn't bad. Every single report on the news about this, they lied about what he actually said. What was in the memo is not what he actually, or what the reporters actually reported was that he said. So it's interesting because he's in that, he lives in that society, or in that, oh, what's the word? He lives in that kind of leftist, that liberal world, and that company. And he just got bit by it himself. So he sees now, if he wasn't a believer before in the way the world is and the way the media is, he is now, because he said one thing and they all lied about what he said, and he lost his job. So I just find that, it's like a guy who dives, or goes cliff climbing without a safety rope and falls. You're not surprised that what happened to him. He sees today he sees what he probably used to support. He knows what it really is.
What I think, but of course I'm only a novice, but if the internet worked effectively, the naming system under an American company, an American Commerce Department, during the golden age of expansion, all those years of the internet, with no great problem. If it works, why mess with it? Why turn it over to an international body, which will have some influence from the United Nations? I know they say it'll be more global, it'll be independent, it'll all work wonderful. It was working wonderful already. Why take a chance? Do you trust the world? Do you trust the UN?
You know what's funny about this? The tech world is full of people who think that the world, they have left-leaning thought. The world is better off if it's centralized, one government, social, all that sort of stuff. But when it came to this subject, and I listened to a lot of tech blogs, and I listen to a lot of tech information out there, podcasts and such. When it came to this, some of the same people who are far left on all other issues said, you know what? I don't really want this to go to the other. America's doing fine. They're not messing with it. They're not censoring things. I'd prefer the Americans keep it. These were people from France, from Britain, from other countries, and other, all over the world. A lot of them said, you know what? We don't trust. So when it comes right down to it, when the rubber hits the road, they didn't trust this bureaucracy, this global bureaucracy. They trusted us more, which is kind of telling.
And with good reason too. Look at what's happening.
With good reason. Yep.
What's the biggest voting bloc in the United Nations? 57 Islamic states.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I could say things about some Far Eastern countries, and there's restriction of certain internet stuff, but I'll try to be nice and not say anything. You get the general idea, right?
You're right. Right.
The director of ICANN was asked, I think it was Ted Cruz that asked him, does the America's Constitution of freedom of speech apply to ICANN? And he said no.
Nope.
Ooh.
So if freedom of speech doesn't apply, then that means that's the very thing where, yes, if the Islamic countries, whatever, want to say that this is not appropriate and they get influence over that, they could say, yes, all these domains must be shut down.
The world does not like us. Most of the world does not like us. They want us to, they don't like that we're in charge. They're jealous. They don't like that we are.
America is evil. And the funny thing is that America would go to the extreme to where they would hurt themselves to keep the internet free.
But the rest of them sure won't do that.
Yeah, the internet's much safer here. And I know that certain people don't believe in American exceptionalism, all that stuff, let's say misinformation. But America has problems, but you're likely to have more freedom here than any place in the world. And probably nothing will change right away, but little by little. And when the wrong people start appointing people to those committees, you wait and see. One of these days, well, we'll see. The internet's not going to be so free.
Yeah, like Ken said,
you know what? As soon as it starts to happen, they're going to be calling for America to take it back, and it'll be too late.
It'll be watch the tech people. Those are the ones that will give you the clue, because when they start saying it's okay, that's when we started down the slippery slope. Because right now they're saying, no, this just shouldn't be what's happening. It should be left in America's hands. We should. And when it comes to the internet, like you said, tech people are like very vicious guard dogs. Mm-hmm. And
the older ones are much more so. The ones that are older and more knowledgeable about what's going on and understand human beings and human nature, they know that whether you like America or not, they're going to be better stewards of this system than a bunch of bureaucrats sitting over in Europe.
So when those people are giving in to this, that's when you know it's in trouble.
Yeah. I would even argue that the world's global economy is benefited by Britain and America, Wall Street and London, especially Wall Street, because it's a free market than you would have if let's say if Wall Street went down. You had to rely on other countries for total free entrepreneurship. It would not be as free and open. So I know people don't like Wall Street, but I think America, and I guess there's a lot of international commerce in Chicago and other places, but America has some of the freest business exchanges in the world.
Yep.
Well, so we want to pick this topic up next time. We're going to focus a little more on how we can learn to be less hypocritical, and anything left over to talk about the domain naming system or other. I don't know if there's any chance of us getting it back. Wouldn't it be nice if they could put a stop to this? Any thoughts on it? I couldn't find out anything.
Things never go back. They never get better. They only go one direction, away from, they always go towards the worst in our lifetime. It seems to be what's happening.
It does seem that way. You look at Obamacare, and whether it's a good policy or not, it doesn't appear that they'll be able to turn the tide back to what it was before. I mean, I thought they were going to do it, but short one vote. But anyway, we see what's happening. So brace yourself.
You know what? Based on what we're seeing today in this country and in the world, with things like what we just discussed tonight, that memo the guy from Google made, or how the snowflake, the people, the millennials and younger that are learning in schools that are not getting taught accurately history and things. It's coming up more and more now. I'm hearing it out there. How long before we start burning books? How long before we can't have Tom Sawyer? How long before we can't have a whole lot of literature that is objectionable because it might offend someone?
It won't be long now.
I know
don't think so.
There's some school districts where they've gotten in trouble for allowing Tom Sawyer to be in the library. I'm pretty sure. Mark Twain's an icon in American literature, but there's some places where they can no longer have him in the library. At least not some of his books, like Tom Sawyer and some others. I thought, wow. And that
We have
book was
young people. I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr.
The theme of that book was anti-slavery, but somehow people just are too sensitive. I don't know how to put it.
Yeah. I mean, when you have people, when you have young adults will just sit on the ground and scream continuously because they don't want to hear what someone's saying. How long before anything they oppose and they don't want to be exposed to is wanted to be destroyed?
And thank goodness that's not hypocritical.
It's exactly what that is. We are tolerant, but we're not tolerant of you. All right. Well, I thank everyone for coming. I thank all our viewers. We had quite a few tonight, and anyone who's going to be watching it later, obviously. Again, this was episode 209, and next week we will have Why Does God Hate Hypocrisy Part 2.
Oh, one final comment. Remember to pray for Carolyn Birch. Her husband passed away and she's still battling cancer, so pray for Carolyn.
All right. And I went and seen Loma. For everyone who knows Loma, I went and seen her today. She's doing good, and so everybody keep praying for her, and they might even release her from the rehab center here in the next few hours, maybe tomorrow sometime or so. All right. And then there's a lot more. I know all of our lists seem to be getting longer. They don't get much shorter, so just keep it up, and we'll see you all again here next week. And my playlist didn't work.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.